Welcome, everyone, to the Playing with Fire podcast. I'm Shireen Anderson, one of the executive producers. Today, we have volume 3 of our interviews with Ann Belden and Paul Gullixson. Please welcome our host, Brian Spatulski, and here we go.
I was involved in the Silverado fire. I did the investigation down there. That was where a couple of firefighters actually got burned over and were very severely burned. But one of the things the community does down there is they have a fire watch. When these conditions come up, these seniors who want to be part of that CERT team kind of a thing, that civilian interaction, they go and they deploy out into these areas, these high risk areas where the high winds are, where there's power lines, and they sit there and they take shifts. And so if something happens, they're able to call it in quicker. And one guy that I ended up interviewing gave me a great statement that totally changed the case around, which had we not spoken with him, there would have been a big delay in figuring this thing out. But he had some great information. And I think getting that kind of organization out into the community is something that is important. So while I was out looking at the Tubbs fire, a couple of very interesting things during my investigation came up. It was interesting because one, I walked that hillside where the fire started, where the arc event was witnessed. I found that the lack of evidence to be taken was an issue for me. There was a lot of evidence that was still there. There was power lines on the ground. And as a fire investigator, we not only take things as evidence because they could have started the fire, but we also need to take evidence to prove things didn't start fires. So there was a significant amount of stuff that was out there on that hillside, to the point where I called up the electrical engineer that CAL FIRE had contracted with to go out there. And I specifically asked him, did you look on the side of the hill? And he was told not to look on the side of the hill.
Wow.
So that was concerning to me.
We hadn't heard that.
The videos that came out, and there was video from a certain winery that was facing that hill, and the arc event, the flash was seen, and I plotted all of that out. But they were focused on the house at the top of the hill. Was baffling to me because, the winery had that video for a long time. I was able to get that video. But then it was, why weren't the power lines taken? Every other fire I've done, if there are power lines in that area, PG&E comes out, we cut them at the transformer or further upstream, and they string new lines in there. We collect those lines and we take them with us. That wasn't done. But I'll tell you what, I went back there, I think 4 months later, the hill had been surveyed and those lines were removed. So somebody got word.
Somebody did it after the fact.
Somebody got word that something had happened, and I was on the hillside. I'm not saying it was me that made this change. Something happened after I started to make some notes to the electrical engineer that CAL FIRE was using, and all of a sudden that stuff got taken. So I always want to portray the fire department in a good manner. Sometimes look at the investigation as maybe not thorough, or I don't rely on another fire investigator's opinion. I always have to come up with my own. And this is a perfect example of why, because that was a misread by some of the other experts, I'll just say. So my opinion, when I first looked at the CAL FIRE report, the report itself had some shady areas and some things I didn't believe. And I'm glad I went out there and looked at the scene to understand it, because that completely changed everything to the cause of the fire as well. Okay, I'll go to Ann first. Ann, did you have somebody's story that was particularly impactful for you?
There were so many stories. In terms of heroes, I think one of the stories was that of Andre Blakely. He was a maintenance worker at Verena, and he did not leave. His executive director left, but he stayed and found a woman up on the 3rd floor who was partially blind and in a wheelchair with a blind dog. And he single-handedly helped to get her down a long flight of stairs. He tried to go for help, and another employee said, "Run, Andre, just run for your life."
Oh my.
And he refused to do that. And he went back. He would not leave this woman alone. And he got her down and he was wheeling her toward his car, his own car, with her dog in her lap. And he hit a bump and she went flying. And he then had to try to drive his car up close to her. He was worried about hitting her because he couldn't see a couple feet in front of him. And he had to somehow, she was much larger than he is. He's a very slight man. And he had to somehow pull her as gently as possible into his car and get her dog in there and raced her to the hospital. And he was so humble about this. He was not treated well by the corporation after this because he was speaking out about what had happened. And Paul, you might want to add to that.
Oh, I was just going to say, when he spilled this woman, Adele Burton, they had hit a speed bump he didn't see because there was thick smoke all around them and the hillside all around them was burning. And he was trying to get down to fresh air by wheeling her off the mountain because he was convinced that everybody had gone. And he ended up saving her life, but he was traumatized by the fact that she had been injured when he dumped her on the road down. And they visited months later. And he apologized to her for dumping her in the road. And she said, "Don't apologize, Andre. I would have died if you had left me." And she said to him, "Don't you recognize, Andre, that we were all abandoned that day? And they left us to die," she said. And they both teared up in that reunion. And it was these kinds of stories we felt that really needed to be told because they weren't being told. And this particular ownership of the Oakmont Senior Living that owned this place were working very hard to keep these stories from being told. And we wanted to make sure that this was on the record and these people were recognized for what they did.
And what was Andre's last name?
Andre Blakely. Yeah, he was a night maintenance worker. He had just come on the shift at 11 o'clock that night with Michael, his friend and companion. And there were two that helped get people out of their rooms when others had left.
One other, there's a caregiver at Villa Capri named Elizabeth Lopez. It took me 2 years to gain her trust. She was so traumatized before she would share her story. And when the executive director called the staff and said, "I'm on my way, keep people in their rooms and guard the exits," because here you have a memory care part of it. The electronic locks no longer work. People can go in and out of the facility because the power's out. Elizabeth Lopez stood up to, she was not the person in charge, but she stood up to the med tech in charge and said, "We're not doing that. We're not going to listen to her. We're going to get people out of here." She was a single mom. She had a 9-year-old girl at home. She said, "I need to get home to my daughter, and we're not going to do this." And she took over and said, "This is what we're going to do." And she started the evacuation to get people from their rooms. And had she not started it at that time, had they waited any longer, by the time people like Kathy and Mark Allen and Melissa Langles arrived, they would have been way behind. So I always felt like she was a hero. She drove people in her car and tried to come back, but was told that police and fire were up there and it was too dangerous for her to go back. But she did take residence in her car. Another caregiver took residence in her car and ended up driving through the firestorm, super traumatized. She was only 21 at the time. So there were many heroes that night. And these were some of the people like Andre and Elizabeth who were later blamed and shamed by the corporation. They ended up suing the corporation because of that.
Wow.
There were many people that didn't want to talk to us, not just because of the post-traumatic stress syndrome, but because they were very afraid of this company and they were afraid of being sued. Some spoke to us only on condition of anonymity. And we had many people warned us not to write this book, that the owner of this complex, like I said, is a very powerful and wealthy man, and he's known to be quite litigious, and we go into some detail about that in the book. Even the district attorney, who was the subject of the recall campaign that he spent $1.7 million to fund, She warned us not to write this. And, we're seeing too much of this in our society today where people under threat of lawsuit are being kept silent. And Ann and I felt we couldn't be silent about this. There was important information
Right.
that needed to get out.
Well, good for you guys. And again, there's a lot of heroes to be discussed, but you two putting this out there, starting that conversation and hopefully keeping it going until there is a fix, a permanent fix for all of these events. And can you tell me what you're pushing for at the state or larger level?
Yes, the daughter of one of the last residents at Villa Capri, Beth Eurota Steffi, wrote a bill that she tried to get dozens of state assembly members or senators to carry. It wasn't until after the fires in Los Angeles that she did get someone to carry her bill. And what it would require is 72 hours of backup power for assisted living facilities with 16 or more residents. So in case of a widespread power outage, in case of a climate disaster, there would be power, whether it's generator or solar, some form of power to power oxygen and medical devices and communication devices so
And
people can
lights
be
in
in
the
touch.
hallways. Yeah.
Lights in the hallways so that seniors don't fall, things like that. It's not to power like elevators, but to power a lot of other
Okay.
things.
It
And
could
we
do
just want
garage
them to
door
have
openers.
72 hours. Yeah, garage door openers, whatever it is. We want them to have 72 hours of backup power.
And where does that sit now?
Well, unfortunately, it passed unanimously in the state Senate, but it hit a roadblock in a committee at the assembly level, and it did not get out of the committee. So it's been shelved, and we're going to have to hopefully revisit it next year. There is a very strong, powerful industry that is in opposition to this. This is a huge industry, growing industry. There's 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every day. This is a big cash cow. And a lot of these places, they want to spend money on chandeliers. They don't want to spend it on safety measures.
Right.
And they're opposed to these requirements for backup generators. They say it's going to cost them too much. And our argument is we can't afford not to do this.
Right. Okay. So can one of you tell me about what the depth of the bill is? Is there something that holds these senior care facilities or corporations responsible for it, for these events?
This particular bill doesn't do that. There were some other pieces of legislation that were passed in the aftermath of the Tubbs fire, and in the aftermath of what happened at Villa Capri and Verena specifically. There was a bill that would require retirement facilities to have detailed emergency plans. They have to install stair chairs and stairwells. They had to make keys available to staff. They required things like drills and transportation plans, but they didn't go into details about what specifically constitutes holding a drill. They didn't require that they include staff, night staff, as we've talked about. There are all kinds of question marks about what constitutes meeting these requirements. And so this was largely written by the industry itself and passed unanimously, but a lot of advocates feel it was kind of smoke and mirrors. There wasn't really a lot of teeth in these particular pieces of legislation. And so that's why we've been pushing for some stronger requirements to do the very thing that you're saying, holding these facilities accountable for the health and safety of the residents and making sure that when they do drills, they include the residents in them so that people know what the plans are and where to find them, and making sure that everybody not only knows where the keys are to the shuttle buses, but they have people trained to actually drive those shuttle buses.
Awesome.
I would like to add that when Beth started, she had a lot more in her bill, and she was advised, as different legislators turned down sponsoring it, to focus on one aspect at a time and chip away rather than try and do a comprehensive bill. And that's what she did. And Senator Wahab from the East Bay, from Fremont, did decide to carry it once it was real focused. But she has many other bills that she would like to put forth.
I love it. Well, as a firefighter and a fire investigator, if there's something that I can do to help with ideas or something, please throw it to Beth and just say, if she needs a resource, I would be more than happy to help in any way I could, even if it's just to talk. So thank you for that.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you.
If you guys could put together a quick sell of this book? Throw me something that grabs people, brings them into it, and doesn't give them the ending.
This is the dramatic story of hundreds of senior citizens left in the path of a ferocious firestorm and what the quest for accountability reveals about the increasing risk to our most vulnerable population.
Yeah, I would say at its core, it's the abandonment of over 100 residents at these two senior care facilities amidst at the time of one of the most destructive and deadly fires in this nation's history. And I would say at its core, it's a story about courage and heroism of the people who went out of their way to go up there, concerned about loved ones, but then discovering that these residents have been left behind. These are individuals that drove through burning branches, through smoke, went around barricades in many cases, and found these people had been left behind, and they had an opportunity to leave and they didn't, and they stayed. And so this is an hour by hour account of what actually happened that night. And it's also a story of accountability because this company denied that these residents had been abandoned and neglected. And there was a long battle for accountability, state investigations by a number of people after the fact. And this lays out the whole story of what actually happened there and the venture to hold this company accountable for what happened. And ultimately is a cautionary tale because there's so many things that happen at these two facilities that we feel are important lessons to be learned of what not to do in the event of a catastrophic event like this.
Right. And sadly to say, it's still happening. Do you feel better because you've written this book now?
Better in what way?
In
Let me
every
just
in
clarify.
in the wildfire preparation for senior homes that's starting to take place, and you emotionally.
Oh, yeah. This was the hardest thing I've ever done. There were many times when I said, oh my God, what have I gotten
Right.
myself into? I feel like Paul and I did something, and I want to mention we had a lot of help from contributing editor Lauren Spates, but I feel like we did something to help advance the safety of seniors, of assisted living homes, of the general population in disasters, and not just wildfires, but hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, freezes, all kinds of disasters. I feel like we took something tragic and tried our very best to make something positive come out of it. Not just recognition for the heroes, but information that hopefully will help others not repeat these mistakes.
Great statement.
Yeah. And I would say I too am proud of what we were able to put together here. I think we told a story that some people didn't want to be told, and that was what really happened at Villa Capri and Verena. It's a story at its heart of courage, and it's also a story of people who abandoned their responsibilities at a key time. And it's a story that needed to be told. And I think we've also in the process have started a conversation about what needs to be different going forward. And I do feel like, yeah, we haven't gotten the legislation approved here in the state of California that we want, but we're not giving up. And Ann and I have had an opportunity to testify at state legislative levels. We've had a chance to do a number of interviews and have this conversation. And wherever we go, we encounter more and more people who want to engage in this conversation, like you, Brian, and we just deeply appreciate that. And I also will note, we were very grateful. Last year, our book won the Book of the Year award by the Investigative Reporters and Editors Conference, which this year was held in Anaheim. This is a national organization. And that brought even more attention to this book. And we were very humbled by that because there are a number of wonderful books, national books that were on that list, but they recognized the importance of this story. And we were very grateful to be included in among those that were recognized. And I think we've started a conversation that we hope to continue. And we thank you for helping us do that.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you very much.
If I can say, I think this would be a book that should be on every city mayor's nightstand. And you both should feel not just proud, but satisfied because this is going to make a difference. It has already started the topic to be discussed, and it's just going to keep going. So it's not like this is a one-time thing. You read it, you put it down. I think people will go back to this and actually look at the plans, and hopefully the people whose parents are either in a facility or will soon be going to a facility, they'll read this book, Inflamed, because it is very impactful. What I've gotten through so far, and I start getting goosebumps when I start talking about it, it's a very well put together book. I'm glad that I was able to get you guys on. I know we've been trying for months to get here. We've got it
Yeah.
done. If you guys are open to it, maybe as something exciting happens, like a bill is passed in the state legislature or something like that, we get you back on. Would that be something you'd be interested in?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we would love it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Because we will get there. So again, to all of you that are watching, Inflamed, please get it. It's an awesome book, even though you know how the fire does go out in the end. I'm just going to ruin it for you. So the fire goes out, but the people, the detail of the people is amazing. So thank you two both very much.
Thank you.
I enjoyed this. And again, this was one of the easiest interviews I've done because you guys were just basically leading me down the path. So thank you for being so pleasant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's our journalism training.
Thank you all for watching the Playing with Fire podcast or listening, depending on what you're doing. Please remember to share this, like it, do all that stuff. We will include a link to the book, at least a discussion of the book in our social media pages. And again, both of you, thank you very much.